needs a little work, but I don't think it's gonna last long at this price.
There's a pool.
Always wanted a pool.
Is this everything?
We'll grow into it.
Y'all ready?
Night Swim. I believe technically the first movie that came out in 2024, and oh boy. All right, we gotta talk about this. Okay, so Night Swim is produced by both Jason Blum and James Wan, respectively. So this is another collaboration between Blumhouse and Atomic Monster, who did like Megan. And from the looks of Megan, I thought it was going to be a bad movie, and kind of like, all right, we've seen this before, and it is one of those we've seen this before kind of movies. But that movie managed. There was a certain charm. There was a specific charm that movie had. That was like, wow, okay, that was actually surprising. And so then the news broke out that they were trying to collab both Blumhouse and Atomic Monster together. And I believe it actually panned out. Like, it actually went through. I don't remember much on that. But anyway, this is their next movie that they've produced, and it's based on a short film by the same name, and it's directed by the same director as that short film. So it kind of has that, like, Andy Muschietti with Mama and David F. Sandberg with Lights Out, where they started out as short films, and then, you know, big-time producers, like with Lights Out, it was James Wan, and then with Mama, it was Guillermo del Toro. They saw it and went, hey, let's make a movie version of him, and both of them turned out pretty good. So this was kind of in that same boat where it's like, all right, let's see how this works. And the plot, you know, it's very familiar with a lot of these like family supernatural horror films where it's a family, they move into the house and it's haunted. It feels very much like that, and that's where a lot of problems lie. But I will get to that in a minute. So the film is about a family that moves into a new house. The dad, who's played by Wyatt Russell, or who is Kurt Russell's son, which is just super cool. And they look pretty similar. And it's like, okay, that's kind of cool. But he's not retired, but he's a baseball player who gets injured, and then, you know, they start to move, and then like, all right, for the time being, let's find a house and not like keep moving all over the place. Let's find just a regular house and just stay there for a while. So then they find this house that has a pool that they noticed, you know, hasn't been used in a while. So they're like, that's kind of weird. They then, you know, work on the pool, and they find out that it's has a certain force or presence that is haunting the pool, which then haunts the house. Which, you know, we've heard all these like different like haunted house type things, but it's really, in this, it's a haunted pool that then haunts the family. So in actuality, it's not a haunted house story, it's a haunted pool story. So it's like, okay, you're changing that up. But again, that's where a lot of the problems lie. And I will say this, I know a lot of people that have been bashing this movie for a bit. And I'm going to say, I don't think this movie is 100% bad, but there's a lot in here where I went, this could have been so much better than it was. So the script, let's start with the script. Script is, you know, not particularly that good. It's not that good. There's moments in here where I'm like, really? What? Like, okay. Character-wise, there's a lot of moments in here where I'm like, okay, these characters are just plain stupid. They make stupid decisions. They're very much in the camp of, oh, well, that was dumb. And there's actually, I will give the movie this. There is a moment where they try to leave the house, but it has like a permanent lock on them where they can't leave. And it's like, okay, see, they actually it's now like they're stuck there. It's not like we have nowhere else to go. It's like we are now stuck here kind of thing, which I liked. It makes sense. It wasn't like let's just slap this in here and try to make it fit. It actually does make sense, and it did help it in some ways, not always, but it did make sense. And I was like, okay, that actually makes sense, because I was going to ask you, like, why don't you just do the titular thing of why are you staying in this house? Why don't you just get out of the house? They actually do try, and they can't, and it makes sense. So I'm like, okay, that's all right. But this falls into very familiar territory. Very familiar. If you have the concept of your film is your pool is haunted, try not to make it so familiar to all these other, supernatural horror movies where families go into it and they start getting ripped apart by the supernatural force that we've had for 40 plus years. Like, can we not do that? And unfortunately, this movie does it. There's so many moments in here where I'm like, oh, it's like this film. Oh, it's like this film. And it also doesn't help that the movie is very, very, very predictable. Like, I knew exactly what was going to happen. And I'm like, oh, God, come on. And what's also funny is I saw this movie with a couple friends of mine, and one of them is like, they like to, like, do the, like, oh, hell no during a titular movie. And during this one, they were doing that, but not in the good way, where you were building up suspense and going like, oh, hell no, like, this is not good. They just went, oh, no, you're dumb. And I was laughing the whole time, because I'm like, yep, I'm glad you said it, because I would have said it. So yeah, the characters, well, they do make an effort to make them like as likable as possible. It falls so flat. It falls so short, and it also doesn't help that they make idiotic decisions, and I'm like, why are you doing that? Like, why is it this? And also for a PG-13 movie, this is kind of tame. This is actually pretty tame. The only real, like, big moment in here that I'm like, whoa, was the first, like, 10 minutes of the movie. But then again, it also felt like very much like the movie I put on, I think it was my honorable mentions last year, The Boogeyman. That movie was PG-13, and the first 5 minutes was, like, so shocking. You're like, whoa, I cannot believe they did that. This kind of falls into that, but I think that movie pushed it a little bit more. But with this one, it was like, okay, I'm set. Let's get going. Let's see what this does. And then it trucks along at, a pretty fast pace. I mean, the movie didn't feel super long to me. I mean, the movie's only an hour and a half, but it didn't feel long to me. It just, there was times where I'm going, like, checking the time, going like, okay, can we move on to something I haven't seen since, like, in another movie before? Like, it was very much like Haunting. It was very much like Amityville Horror. It was very much like 13 Ghosts in a way. Where it was like, okay, I've seen these done before and much better. But when you have, to me, if you have a concept like you have a haunted pool, try not to do anything that has been done before, like with a haunted house movie, or with like the family going to a haunted house. That's what makes like something like The Shining more different, is that it's a family going to, the Overlook Hotel to just look it over, and, they start being ripped apart because the father is losing their mind. They don't really play a whole lot with the same haunted house tropes, but again, this movie tries to do those similar things like Amityville Horror, like The Shining, like Haunting, where it does pretty much the same thing, and I'm like, oh, that's just cheap. So I feel like the movie was... I don't feel like the movie was awful. I feel like the movie was... I feel like the movie was almost like a cake they were making. They were making all the ingredients and stuff like that, and then they all of a sudden lost like half their ingredients, and then looked in the corner and they saw the ingredients of all the family haunted house movies we've seen for the past 40 years, plus years, and just grabbed all that and started mixing it in with all the ingredients, and this is what we got. So I was like, oh, come on, don't do that. So, I don't think this is terrible. I think it's a fine, because there were some things that I did like. The performances, they did actually kind of feel like a family. Like what I said with the reason why they couldn't leave the house. There were some things in the plot where I'm like, okay, that actually makes sense. There was a lot of dumb in there, but most of the time I'm like, okay, I understand this. I understand why they're in this situation. I understand why they can't do this. But overall, it feels very just empty, and they were trying to fill it with stuff we've seen in haunted house films for 40 plus years. So I think it's a fine. I wouldn't, rush out to like watch this. It's kind of like okay, like I'll watch this, whenever. Like it's whenever I get the time. And I always appreciate when, filmmakers go to like YouTube and try to find, future filmmakers there. This one, I think, could have been really good, but they just kind of took the lazy way out, and we're trying to say, like, how can we make a 5-minute short, stretch it out into an hour-and-a-half film? Let's take all these things that we know and just throw it in here. So, while I think there's a lot of potential in this movie, I think a lot of it just was half-baked. It was just not in a pot way, more in like a actual like baking way. So I don't think it's a terrible movie, but it's definitely a movie that I'm like, okay, you guys had a lot of potential and this is what you did. So not totally terrible, but I wouldn't rush out to see this. It's more like I don't know, if you got nothing else to watch, I would say put this one on.
Marco,